Studs Lonigan by James T. Farrell, Chapter 1. Studs Lonigan, on the verge of 15 and wearing his first suit of long trousers, stood in the bathroom with a sweet caparel pasted in his mug. His hands were jammed in his trouser pockets, and he sneered. He puffed, drew the fag out of his mouth, inhaled, and said to himself, "Well, I'm kissing the old dump goodbye tonight." Studs was a small, broad-shouldered lad. His face was wide and planed. His hair was a light brown. His long nose was too large for his other features, almost a Sheeney's nose. His lips were thick and wide, and they did not seem at home on his otherwise frank and boyish face. He was always twisting them into his familiar tough guy sneers. He had blue eyes. His mother rightly called them baby blue eyes. He took another drag and repeated to himself, "Well, I'm kissing the old dump goodbye." The old dump was St. Patrick's Grammar School, and St. Patrick's meant a number of things to Studs. It meant school, and school was a jailhouse that might just as well have been barred windows. It meant the long, wide, chalk-smelling room of the 7th and 8th grade boys with its 40 or 50 squirming kids. It meant the second floor of the tan brick undistinguished parish building on 61st Street that had swallowed so much of Studs' life for the past 8 years. It meant the black garbled Sisters of Providence with their rattling beads, their swishing strides, and the funny-looking wooden clappers they used, which made a dry snapping sound, and which hurt like anything when a guy got hit over the head with one. It meant Sister Carmel, who used to teach 4th grade, but was dead now, and who used to hit everybody with the edge of a ruler because she knew they all called her the bearded lady. It meant Studs, twisting in his seat, watching the sun come in the windows to show up the dust on the floor, twisting and skirming and letting his mind fly to all kinds of places that were not like school. It meant Battle-Axe Bertha, talking and hearing lessons, her thin, sunken-jawed face white as a ghost, and sometimes looking like a corpse. It meant Bertha yelling in that creaky old woman's voice of hers. It meant Bertha trying to pound lessons down your throat when you weren't interested in them, church history, and all about the Jews and Moses and Joseph and Daniel in the lion's den, and Solomon, who was wiser than any man that ever lived except Christ, and maybe the popes who had the Holy Ghost to back up what they said. Arithmetic and square and cube roots and percentage that Studs had never been able to get straight into his bean, catechism lessons, the 10 commandments of God, the 6 commandments of the church, the 7 capital sins, and the 7 cardinal virtues, and that lesson about the 6th commandment which didn't tell a guy anything at all about it and only had words that he'd found in the dictionary, like adultery, which made him all the more curious. Grammar with all its dry rules and its sentences that had to be diagrammed and were never diagrammed right, spelling in words like apothecary that Studs couldn't spell. Palmer method writing that was supposed to make you less tired and made you feel and made you more tired, and the exercises of shaking your arm before each lesson, and the round and straight, and the copybook, all smeared with ink that had gone through doing exercise after exercise on neat sheets of Palmer paper so that he could get a Palmer method certificate that his old man kicked about paying for because he thought it was a graft. History lessons from the dull red history book, but they would have been so bad in America, had more wars, and if a guy could talk and think about the battles without having to memorize their dates, and the dates of the presidents were elected, and when Fulton invented the steamboat, and Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, or whatever in hell he did invent. School meant Bertha, and Bertha should have been put away long ago, where she could kneel down and pray herself to death, because she was old and crabby and always hauling off on somebody. It was a miracle that a person as old as Bertha could sock as hard or holler as loud as she could. Even Sister Bernadette Marie, who was the superior and taught the 7th and 8th grade girls in the next room, sometimes had to come in and ask Bertha to make less noise because she couldn't teach with all the racket going on. But telling Bertha not to shout was like telling a bull that it had no right to see red. And smart guys, like Jim Claiborne, who did his homework every night, couldn't learn much from her. And school meant Dan and Bill Donahue and Tubby and all the guys in the and his bunch. And you couldn't find a better gang of guys to pal with this side of hell. And it meant going to Mass in the barn-like church on the first floor every morning in Lent, and to Stations of the Cross on Friday afternoons. Stations of the Cross were always too long, unless Father Lonigan and them, and marching on Holy Thursday morning in the church with a lily in your hand, and going to communion on the third Sunday each month at 8 o'clock Mass with the boys' sodality. It meant goofy young Danny O'Neill, the dippy punk, who couldn't be hurt or made cry no matter how hard he was socked, because his head was made of hard stuff like iron and ivory and marble. It meant Vink Curley, who had water on the brain, and the doctors must have taken his brains out, drowned and dead like a fish, that time they were supposed to have taken a quart of water from his oversized bean. The kids in Vink's class said that Sister Cyrilla used to pound him on the bean with her clapper, and he'd sit there yelling he was going to tell his mother, and it was funny, and all the kids in the room laughed their guts out. They didn't have him as crazy as Vink in Stud's class, but there was T.B. McCarthy, who was always getting his ears beat off and being made to kneel up in front of the room, or to go in Sister Bernadette's room and sit with all the girls and let them laugh at him. And there was Reardon with horses' hoofs for feet. One day in geography in the 5th grade, Cyrilla called on Reardon and asked him what the British Isles consisted of. Reardon didn't know, so Studs whispered to him to say iron, and Reardon said iron. Sister Cyrilla thought it was so funny she marked him right for the day's lesson. And St. Patrick's meant Weary Riley, and Studs hated Weary. He didn't know whether or not he could lick Weary, and Weary was one tough customer, and the guys had been waiting for Studs and Weary to scrap ever since Weary had come to St. Patrick's in the 3rd grade. Studs was a little leery about mixing it with Riley. No, he wasn't. It was just, well, there was no use starting fights unless you had to, and he'd never backed out of a scrap with Weary Riley or any other guy. And that time he had pasted Weary in the mush with an icy snowball, well, he hadn't backed out of a fight when Weary started getting sore. He had just not meant to hit Weary with it, and in saying so, he had only told the truth. St. Patrick's meant a lot of things. St. Patrick's meant Lucy. Lucy Scanlon would stand on the same stage with him in a few hours, and she would receive her diploma. She would wear a white dress, just like his sister Frances and Weary's sister Fran, and she would receive her diploma. Everybody said that Fran Lonigan and Fran Riley were the 2 prettiest girls in the class. Well, if you asked him, the prettiest girl in the class was black-bobbed-haired Lucy. He got soft and felt like he was all mud and mush inside. He held his hand over his heart and told himself, "My Lucy." He flicked some ashes in the sink and said to himself, "Lucy, I love you." Once, when he had been in the 6th grade, he walked home with Lucy. Now he puffed his cigarette, and the sneer went off his face. He thought of the March day when he had walked home with her. He had walked home with her. All along Indiana Avenue he had been liking her, wanting to kiss her. Now he remembered it better than the day when he was not just a punk, and he had been bashed the living Moses out of that smoke who pulled a razor on him over in the Carter playground, and a gang of guys had carried him around on their shoulders, telling him what a great guy he was, and how, when he grew up, he would become the white hope of the world, and lick Jack Johnson for the heavyweight championship. He remembered the day with Lucy, and his memory of it was like having an awful thirst for a drink of clear, cold water or a chocolate soda on a hot day. It had been a windy day in March, without any sun. The air had seemed black, and the sky blacker, and the sun, and all the sun that day had been in his thoughts of her. He had had all kinds of goofy, dizzy feelings that he liked. They had walked home from school along Indiana Avenue, he and Lucy. They hadn't spoken much, and they had stopped every little while to look at things. They had stopped at the corner of 60th, and he had shown her the basement windows they had broken, just to get even with old Boshwa, the hunky janitor, because he always ran them off the grass when they goofed on their way home from school. And she had pretended that it was awful for guys to break windows, when he could see by the look in her eyes that she didn't at all think it so terrible. And they walked on slow, pigeon-toed slower, so that it would take them a long time to get home. He carried her books, too, and they had talked about this and that, about the skating season that was just finished, and about the spelling match between the 5th and 6th grade boys and girls, where both of them had been spelled down at the first crack of the bar, and they had talked about just talk. When they came to an elevated structure near 59th, he had shown her where they played shinny with the tin cans, and she said it was a dangerous game, and you were liable to get your shins hurt. Then he had shown her where he had climbed up the girder to the top, just below the elevated tracks, and she had shivered because it was such a dangerous, brave thing to do, and he had felt all proud, like a hero, or like Bronco Billy or Eddie Polo in the movies. They had walked home lazy, and he had carried her books and wished he had the price to pay for her candy, or a soda even, if it was Lent, and they had stood before the great two-story building where she lived, and had wanted, as the devil wants souls, to kiss her. And he hadn't wanted to leave her because, when he did, he knew that day would be a blacker, and he would feel like he did what he had been just out, and it would feel like he did when he had just been out of his diapers, and he used to be afraid of the night. There had been something about that day. He had gone on in school, wishing for another one like it to come along. And now he felt all over again the goofy, dizzy, flowing feelings it had given him. He puffed, and he told himself, well, it's so long to the old dump tonight. He wanted to stand there and think about Lucy, wondering if he would ever have days with her like that one, wondering how much he'd see of her after she went to high school. And he goddamned himself because he was getting soft. He was Studs Lonigan, a guy who didn't have mushy feelings. He was a hard-boiled egg, and that had left in the pot a couple of hours too long. He took another drag of a cigarette. He wanted that day back again. He faced the mirror and stuck the fag in the right-hand corner of his mouth. He looked tough and sneered. Then he let the cigarette hang from the left side. He studied himself with satisfaction. He placed the cigarette in the center of his puss and put on a weak-kneed expression. He took the cigarette out of his mouth, daintily, barely holding it between his thumb and first finger, and he pretended that he was a grown-up mama's boy, smoking for the first time. He said to himself, Jesus Christ. He didn't know that he bowed his head when he muttered the Lord's name, just as Sister Cyrilla had always taught him to do. He took a vicious poke at the air, as if he were letting one fly at Mama's boy. He stuck the fag back in his mouth and looked like Studs Lonigan was supposed to look. He lowered the lid on the toilet seat and sat down to think. He puffed at the cigarette and flicked the ashes in the sink. He heard Frances talking. Get out of my way, Fritzy. Get out of my way, please. And Mother, will you come here, please? I told you. The hem was not right on this dress. Now, Mother, come here and look at the way my skirt hangs. If I ever appear on the stage with my skirt like this, I'll be disgraced. Disgraced, Mother. He heard his old lady hurrying to Frances's room, saying, "Yes, Frances, darling, only you know, I ask you not to call Loretta Fritzy. I'm coming, but I tell you, your dress is perfectly even all around. I told you so this afternoon when you tried it on with Mrs. Sankey here." He could hear their voices as they jabbered away about her dress, but he didn't know what they were saying, and anyway, he didn't give two hoots in hell. Girls had loose screws in their beans. Well, girls like his sister, anyway. Girls like Lucy or Helen Shires, who was just like a guy, were exceptions. But there he was, getting soft again. He said to himself, "I'm so tough that you know what happens? Well, Bo, when I spit, rivers overflow. I'm so hard I chew nails. See, Bo?" He took a last drag at his cigarette, tossed the butt down the toilet, and let the water run in the sink to wash the ashes down. He went to the door and had his hand on the knob to open it when he noticed the bathroom was filled with smoke. He opened the small window and commenced waving his arms around to drive the smoke out. But why in hell shouldn't they know? Why did his graduating and his long jeans mean then? What did his graduating and his long jeans mean then? He was older now, and he could do what he wanted. Now he was growing up. He didn't have to take orders anymore as he used to. He wasn't going to take it anymore, and he was going to tell the old man that he wasn't going to high school. The bathroom was slow in clearing. He beat the air with his hands. Frances rapped sharply on the door and asked him to get a move on. He waved his arms around. Frances was back in a moment. "William, will you please hurry?" she rapped impatiently. "All right, I'll be right out." "Well, why don't you then? I have to hurry, I tell you. And I'm in the play tonight, and you're not. When you had your play last May, I didn't delay you like this. I helped you learn your lines and everything. And now when I have to be there. William, will you please hurry, please? Oh, Mother, won't you come here and tell Studs to hurry up out of the bathroom?" She furiously pounded on the door. Studs was winded. He stopped trying to beat the smoke out. The smoke was still thick. "All right, don't get so excited." He wooed and wiped his forehead, as if there had been perspiration on it. That was a narrow escape. He almost told his sister not to get one on. And then there had been 16 kinds of hell to pay around this house. Ooh. You'd thought he wanted to stay in there the way she was acting. Well, he was going to walk out and let 'em see the smoke, and when they blew their gobs off, he would tell them from now on, he was his own boss, and he would smoke where and when he damn well pleased, and furthermore, he wasn't going to high school. "William, will you please let me in? Mother, won't you please, oh please come here and make him get out. He's been in there a half hour. He's reading. He's always mean and selfish like that. Mother, please. I heard you," Studs said. "Well, if you did, come on out," she snapped. He heard his mother coming up the door while Frances banged and shouted away. He took a towel. Why didn't he think of it sooner and started flapping it around? His mother said, "William, won't you hurry now like a good son? Frances has to go in there, and she has to finish dressing and be up there early because she's going to be in the play. Now, son, hurry." "All right, I can't help it. I'll be right out." "Well, please do," Frances said. The mother commenced to tell Frances that William was going to let her right in, but Frances interrupted. "But, Mother, he's been in there almost an hour. He has no consideration for other people's rights. He's selfish and mean. Oh, Mother, I got to go in there, and what will I do if I spoil my graduation dress on his account? Make him, Mother, and now I'm getting unnerved, and I'll never be able to act in the play." The old lady persuaded, and she told Studs that she and his father couldn't go until they had all their children off, and they would be disgraced if they came late for the entertainment on the night their son and daughter graduated. Frances banged on the door and yelled. "Ah, don't get so crabby," Studs said to her while he fanned the air with his towel. "See, Mother, see? He says I'm insane just because I have him ask him to hurry, and he's been in there all day. He's reading or smoking cigarettes. Please make him hurry." "Why, Francis, how dare you accuse him like that?" Mrs. Lonigan commenced to say. Studs heard his sister dashing away, hollering to the old man to come and do something. He fanned vigorously, and his mother stood at the door urging.